Hello, and welcome to the final episode of Season 1 of the In Between Sessions podcast. I'm your host, Lili Torre, and if this is your first time joining us, don't worry, you're not too late. You've got 10 amazing episodes to catch up on while I get to work on Season 2. This podcast is all about the ways that people can support their mental health in between their therapy sessions. And I have to say, we really covered a lot of ground on the different ways people can go about doing so. We talked about creativity, we talked about mindfulness, journaling, social media, food, body image, even Dungeons and Dragons. And so I want to take this episode to sort of synthesize, what does this all mean? What were the common themes that came up? What are our takeaways? And what are we going to be doing in between seasons while I work on Season 2? I also really want to hear from you because at the end of the day, the whole purpose of this podcast is to support you. I want you to get something out of listening to this show. With that in mind, I'm going to be linking in the show notes a Google form that I would love for you to fill out. I'm going to ask questions about your thoughts on Season 1, what you want to hear more or less of in Season 2, what themes you want us to cover, and who you want to hear from. Please feel free to fill out as much or as little as you like, and I thank you so much in advance for all of the feedback and the insights that you give me. So let's jump into talking about some of the themes that came up this season. As I mentioned earlier, we discussed a wide variety of topics this season, but there were definitely some similar tones or notes that kind of came out in each conversation. I feel like something that really stuck with me was the idea of diversifying our tools, introducing flexibility, and taking small steps. One theme that came up a lot this season was the fact that there is no one single skill or tool that will always work for you, including therapy, which is kind of the whole point of this podcast. It is so important for us to have so many different ways that we can support our mental health through different seasons of our lives. I talked with several of our guests about the fact that any coping skill has the opportunity to be overused, whether that be food or exercise, social media for sure. And there are things that happen in our lives that make those tools less accessible to us, like winter weather getting in the way of an outdoor walk, or an injury keeping us from going to a yoga class. Food can be an accessible and helpful coping skill, but it can also make us feel sick if we eat too much of it. Going out with our friends can create feelings of connection and adventure and awe and joy, but it can also hurt our bank accounts if we're going out to expensive meals every time. The idea of this need for balance, boundaries, and limits in our self-care felt really present and important this season. I think social media was a big example of that in our conversation with Glenn and talking about screen time limits with Pam. And I think this is where this idea of flexibility comes in. How do we think differently about what, quote unquote, counts as exercise? Is there room for a movement to be less structured? How do we introduce flexibility into what we conceptualize as being a healthy or good food? What if it tastes good? What if our bodies feel good when we eat it? What if it keeps me full for a long time and satiated? How can we introduce flexibility into the way that we think about creativity and mindfulness, the way that we think about ourselves? And if all of this sounds really overwhelming, like, oh my gosh, we have to diversify our tool belt, so I have to acquire all these new skills, the thing that I would invite you to ground yourself in is the idea that kept coming up throughout this season, which is taking small steps. With Madoka, we talked about starting to build community just by saying hello to the barista at your coffee shop. We talked with several guests about curating your experience on social media. That can be small steps like unfollowing accounts that feel harmful to you or following accounts that make you feel good. That can look like taking a mindful moment and just ground yourself in what's happening right now. Or that can look like pulling out a journal and writing something, anything down. Taking Mikey Wessel's advice to jot down what you spent money on that day or the literal list of things that you did, taking away the pressure for it to be life-altering and meaningful. Which brings me to another idea that I felt like came up a lot, which is perfectionism. And it got me curious about how we can remove perfectionism from our self-care practices. With Pamela Hauser, we talked about releasing the need to be good at art and to just let the art be the self-care, be the thing, be the reason to do it. With Dr. Ashley Clausen, we talked about introducing flexibility and removing perfectionism from our relationship with sleep, taking off some of that pressure to get a perfect night's sleep. And with Ali B. Gorey, we talked about how to have a relationship with art that feels joyful and playful, especially when you feel like there's a reason that you should be good at it or you should create something incredible and amazing. What if the creation in and of itself was the point? Same with Mikey Wessels and giving yourself grace when you don't actually manage to journal every single day, but allowing yourself to go back and just write something down to represent the day. Community also came up a lot this season. It was at least mentioned in the episodes with Madoka, Ali B, Glenn, Justin, and Mikey. And it was definitely mentioned in Sarah's episode as well. My big takeaways from our conversations on community are that community requires intention. Community doesn't just happen, but that intention doesn't have to be the big, grand acts. It really can be those small moments. I remember talking with Mikey Wessels about the fact that friendships aren't always convenient. They're not always glamorous. They're not always Instagrammable. Sometimes it's scraping adhesive off of a friend's shower before they move, but that they're worth the maintenance because they contribute to our sense of community and belonging. I believe it was Ali B who mentioned third spaces and having a space outside of your home and outside of your work where you feel like you belong to your community at large. If you're listening to this from Kansas City, I feel like this is one of the things that Kansas City does incredibly well. Often I feel like there is so much connection over sports, especially the Chiefs, which is amazing. And speaking for myself, as someone who's not much of a sports fan, sometimes that can feel a little bit alienating. But I find that, I don't have to go out and buy a Chiefs jersey or t-shirt even, but wearing a little bit of red on a Chiefs game day does make me feel part of something, does act as sort of a symbol to people that, I'm one of you, I'm part of this community. And I find that it's easier to connect with people over that, even though it's not something that feels super important to me. But it also looks like being vulnerable and putting yourself out there at places that you frequent a lot, getting to know the people behind the counter. That's the only way to get to a place where they know your order, they know your name, they're happy to see you. And that may feel like kind of a shallow surface level relationship and, maybe even transactional. But those are the types of small moments that really add up. And it's been something that I've been trying to be more intentional about. I walk to the same coffee shop in town every morning, and I've really tried to be intentional about getting to know the people behind the counter. And it really has made the experience more meaningful to me. What used to just be a morning walk and a cup of coffee is now a connection point. As I've already mentioned, creativity was a big theme on the pod as well, and had lots of great creative people on the show this season. And one way that I keep thinking about creativity is this idea that came up, I believe, in the episode with Mikey Wessels about input versus output. I think we live in a time where there is so much input, primarily from social media, but really from our smartphones in general. And all of us are just on the receiving end of a lot of information. And so really trying to ask ourselves, what is it that I'm doing with this information? What do I want to do with this information? I have all of these little nuggets of maybe wisdom or humor or whatever it is. Let me do something with this. Ali B shared her kind of off-the-cuff definition of creativity as being awake to wonder and mystery and doing something about it. And I feel like both of those things are so important, that as we're receiving this input, we are awake to what is it about the things that I am taking in that express wonder and mystery or have wonder and mystery about them. And then what am I going to do with that? What does this information or this idea inspire me to do? That could look like a painting, that could look like some other type of art, but that could also look like the way that you show up at work. Maybe you learned something from a social media post about a way to build effective habits, and there's something that you want to try out at work, and so you apply what you learned in your workspace. And I think what all of this sort of boils down to is intentionality. Allie B mentioned the idea of when you're reducing your frequency of sessions, being intentional about what you use that new free hour period of your week for. If you're going from a 1-hour session every week to every other week, what are you going to do on your off week to take care of yourself? What are you using that time for? I think this idea of intentionality can also apply to our relationship with social media, as we discussed with Glenn DeVar. Since my conversation with Glenn, I've found myself when I'm scrolling, and I kind of notice that I'm scrolling, asking myself, what is it that I'm looking for right now? Am I wanting to laugh? Am I hoping to find something that interests me and, to learn something? Am I looking for connection and community right now? And then I ask myself, is there any other way I can go about that more directly? Rather than waiting and hoping that the algorithm is going to give me what I'm seeking, how can I play an active role in finding that? If it's humor, is there a television show that I can choose to put on that makes me laugh? If it's learning, I have so many continuing education credit videos that I have to do for my license that I could be watching instead of scrolling on social media. If it's community and connection, why don't I text a friend and stop scrolling? So to recap, I think my main takeaways from this season have been seeking out diversity in my tools and experiences, practicing flexibility and reducing perfectionism, encouraging myself to take small steps rather than large sweeping changes, and being intentional with my time, my energy, my attention, and my bandwidth. I would love to know what your main takeaways have been from this season, as well as what you want to hear more of next season. I want to take this opportunity to thank every single guest that was on this season for their time, their vulnerability, their wisdom, and their willingness to be part of a brand new podcast, because you never really know how that's going to go. I want to thank you for listening to season 1 of this brand new podcast, because like I said, you never really know how it's going to go. I hope that you found it helpful. I hope that you found it joyful. And I can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to season 2. Like I said, I want to make sure season 2 represents what you're looking for and what you're wanting more of. So please, please, please head on down to the show notes, click the link, and fill out the feedback form to let me know what you want to hear less of, more of, and everything in between. In the meantime, make sure that you're following at In Between Sessions Podcast on Instagram and or at Lili Torre Counseling on Instagram and TikTok so that you will know as soon as season 2 launches. If you've enjoyed this season, I encourage you to please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and consider sending this to a friend. Thank you so much, and I can't wait to see you next time in Between Sessions.